Well, hello, I am Roy Harriman, and I am here with Strategos Vice President Mark Warren, and we thank you for joining us today on another issue of Strategos Security Week. Our topic today is on everyone's mind, and it is lessons learned from the mass shooting at a Parkland, Florida high school last week. As most everyone knows, 17 people were killed, many more people were injured. And our goal in this discussion today is to just unearth insights that can ultimately save lives and prevent people from harm. So we're not second guessing law enforcement or school officials, but we want to quickly, while this is still in our minds, learn and apply anything that we can from a real event in order to protect people. And we also request, if this Facebook Live show, if it's helpful to you, please share it on Facebook, and we also would love to hear respectful comments and questions during the course of the broadcast. Mark, I wanted to jump right into our topic today, and this whole issue begins with access to the school, the shooter's access to the school. How did the shooter get into the school, and what can we learn from that?
You know, and this is something that we wind up watching so frequently. Every time one of these incidents happens, we have to kind of make some assumptions because our information comes from the news as well. And right now, we don't know for sure how he got in, but some of the assumptions that you have to make is that the school was probably not a controlled access facility, meaning it's not completely locked down where basically somebody or visitor has to come, get buzzed through a door, and then allowed into the building. So as far as we know, he was able to just either walk through or he could have piggybacked. If it was a controlled access building, somebody could have opened a door and he went through when they opened it or went through with them. So right now we're just speculating on that, but it's important for people to understand it is part of a layering effect that gives you a better layer of security. However, it can still be breached, and we saw that with the situation in Newtown, Connecticut, where he actually shot the glass out, kind of created his own door and walked in. So it's only one part of what we're trying to discuss, but right now we really don't know how he got in. It's not been specified.
That's right. It's wise to withhold judgment on news reports and secondhand information because we know that there's a lot of misinformation that gets churned out and repeated again and again for years. We were just talking this week about some information that people still think is wrong about the Newtown, Connecticut shooting.
Right.
Mark, one thing that I know we do have a lot of documented evidence is the record and some of the psychological behavior and the school records of the adolescent who committed the shooting. From what you've been able to understand, what did law enforcement at multiple levels, what did they already understand about this man, and does any of that matter?
It all matters. Every time one of these incidents happens, when you start following them, some of the things that we always look for is what are people saying after the fact that they knew previously. And we're seeing several different instances where things have fallen through the cracks. The FBI received several complaints about this gentleman where they were giving them information that he'd either made a threat, wanted to be a professional school shooter, those types of things. They did not follow up directly, said either they couldn't identify for sure who he was, or it didn't raise to the level of the type of threat that they could actually take action on. We also know local law enforcement had been given information about this subject, and they had responded 20 to 30 times to his house on domestic related issues as well as other threats. A report came out today that the last family that he was living with actually told local law enforcement that he had pointed his weapon at other people and actually had placed the gun on somebody's head. So again, you start seeing where things fall through the cracks. And there was a female that was, her sister was in the school. And when her sister called her and told her who it was, she had befriended this man on one of the social media sites and had seen all of the pictures of his guns and everything else. And the lady actually took more responsibility than I've heard even the law enforcement for having let something fall through the cracks. She said, I should have done more. And the unfortunate thing is when you look at these things, it's going to impact that community. And it's going to be the suspect from the community that typically attacks people in the community. And then the people that have to respond to it are from the community. And so the reason that that's important is that community probably has more information than anyone else about this particular person. And I don't want to sound calloused, but the reality is the FBI in Washington, D.C. cannot care more about their community than they do. So how do we get people to awaken to the fact that you have to pay attention to these things? If you see something, you have to say it. But then we've also seen, though, where people said something and it still fell through the cracks. And this is the unfortunate thing, especially with law enforcement in what we do. When we make a mistake, potentially the outcome could be someone's life. And so we really have to make sure that we don't allow things to fall through the cracks.
Now, I don't want to ask you to speak out of the realm of information that you don't have, but apart from this man being incarcerated and due process being served, was there anything that, could have been done to keep him away from the school?
Well, now I've heard a countering view that he never was actually expelled from the school. The school was aware of the threat. The principal made the statement yesterday that I heard on the news that basically he said, you can't just kick a kid out because he made a threat. And I'm like, I don't know where you come from, but typically the schools we work with, no, you can. You cannot sacrifice one student's education for the safety of all of the other students. So those are some tough decisions that have to be made. But we also know that this person had a social worker assigned to them that knew that his mother had passed away, his adopted mother had passed away. We know that his father had died years ago. This person had no other peer groups or anyone else as far as a support group directly in his life. And the social worker knew it. To me, if you're trained in behavior pattern recognition, some of the other things that we're going to be looking at, those are all flags that you have to look at, not just in and of themselves. We have to look at the larger picture. But there was so many flags with this person that how did it fall through the cracks? It really is kind of amazing that it could.
Mark, one of the key issues that Strategos talks about and teaches about is lockdown. In this particular situation, we know that the outside doors, at least at this time of day, were not locked. What about the inside doors? Were they locked, and was it effective?
And that's a huge frustration for us. We've dealt with, to be quite honest, probably closer to 150,000 people in 15 countries we've trained. And the reality is when you go into as many schools as we have, we see a common theme. And that is that most teachers teach with their classroom door unlocked and open. And that doesn't sound like it's that big a deal until you actually look at most of the locks in a classroom setting. It's a keyed lock on the outside. They don't have typically a capability to lock the door from the inside, the classroom side, which means now when they go into lockdown, these people are having to step into the hallway, use a key at the worst time of their life, lock the door and close it. And we keep saying and preaching over and over and over, why don't you teach with your door closed and locked? Because when it happens, you're not going to want to step into the hallway where that threat is and expose yourself to that threat, and you may not lock down. And we saw that in Newtown. That's one of the things that I can guarantee you caused a lot of the deaths in Newtown was those teachers teaching with their doors unlocked and open. So to me, one of the biggest things that could be done right now is change that protocol. Now, the argument is inconvenience. Students have to be able to leave the classroom and then they come back and they have to be let back in. It causes a larger disruption. And what I try to make them understand is security and convenience are interrelated. The more secure you want to be, the less convenient it's going to be. The more secure you want to be, the more inconvenient it's going to be. So that you have to find the balance between security and convenience and determine what you're willing to do in order to keep your kids safe. It's just that in our experience, that is a matter of seconds that you typically don't have, or that you could be saving yourself in a critical crisis.
Now, Mark, do we know that in this particular situation at this school that many classroom doors were unlocked?
I'm making a huge assumption. I'll be honest. I've not had someone say my door wasn't locked, but I've seen them say I went to lock my door, which tells me if you had to go lock it, it was unlocked to start with. Now, one of the things that I did see was when they laid out the timeline, and they actually drew a diagram of the shooter's movements. And on the first floor that he entered into those rooms multiple times. Now, he could have been shooting through the door. One of the interviews I saw basically said that the students were saying that he was looking through the window and was shooting kids through the window. So again, it's another one of those fallacies that your typical lockdown for a school says, close, unlock my door, turn the lights off, move it to the safe area of the room and take roll call. Well, what's the safe area of the room? Sitting in front of that window in the door is definitely not the safe area. Why were those kids still there? They should have been moved out of that line of sight. So there are so many things that you start picking up on that I can't say, beyond a reasonable doubt that they were unlocked or they were locked, but I know past experience typically how they are, and they're usually not locked.
No, that's good insight. Just irrespective of what what may have happened in this case, or in some instance, your experience in classrooms across the country is that doors typically aren't locked. So no, that's excellent insight. We want to, again, thank you if you're just joining us for being a part of watching today as we look at the Parkland, Florida school shooting and lessons that we can learn from it. We also want to encourage you, if this is of value to you, to share the video, and we appreciate your questions, comments. Let's stop for just one moment here and call it here. Question from Jason and Lacy McClain, and their question is, how many schools practice active shooter drills?
That's a great question. And it's all relative. In the state of Missouri, they are required to at least conduct one drill per year that has to be run by a Missouri post-certified police officer. The big problem, though, it's not always the same thing. Running a drill is not the same as training for that type of a crisis. And I use the example as a former police officer, we had to qualify our police officers. And you have a lot of police departments that take their police officers to the range and they qualify once per year and they don't ever train. So there's a big difference in showing proficiency, which is what a drill is designed to do, and then practicing to implement that proficiency, which is what training does. And there lies the breakdown. I would rather see schools actually conduct training to educate personnel on awareness, what they should be looking for, behavior pattern recognition on what are some of the symptoms that we may be looking for in someone's behavior that makes us indicate or may indicate that they could be moving towards that direction. And so to me, the drill should be designed to test the training. Has the training been done? Is it successful in what we want it to do? And is it working? And so for us, we see that because everything that we do with a school, we put them through scenario drilling. And that's where their learning really does take place, because when they learn how to properly barricade a door, we see that they can get it done in 15 seconds. We make them do the drills without using the locks on their door, and they have to keep us out as the bad guy. So that's where we see the success of training as opposed to just running a drill.
And Strategos is really effective at training. I know I've been on the receiving end and the observing end of the training, and it sticks with you. Another question, and again, please keep questions coming and comments coming. We'd love to hear constructive and respectful dialogue here as we go along. Is with this particular incident at this school in Parkland, Florida, there was an issue with the fire alarm. It almost seemed like a diabolical plan on the part of the shooter. Can you tell us what you know about what happened with the fire alarm and what were the results?
We do know that the fire alarm at some point was set off. Now, the school had gone through a fire drill earlier in the day, and seeing a lot of the interviews, people again suffered from normalcy bias because they thought, well, wait, we already had a drill today. Why are they doing another one? But it wasn't a drill. So the problem was at that point, whether he pulled it or maybe it was set off as a result of the gun smoke from him discharging his weapons. The reality is the fire alarm did go off, and what it did is it started pulling people out. There were several classes that actually started moving towards the shooter, and a custodian realized what was happening, stopped them, turned them around, and they went and they were locked down as a result of that. So they saw they were able to remove themselves. But one of the big failures that we see over and over, and this is a competitive culture, because it's two different types of safety. So the first one is with International Fire Code and what we have done in our schools because of International Fire Code to make them a safer place. And it's been very, very successful. Schools are built by code not to burn for typically about 2 hours. So literally, if I'm in a secured classroom and the fire is not directly in my classroom, I'm probably safe for 2 hours. So while we've not had a child killed as a result of a fire in over 50 years, how many have we had killed because of intruders coming into the school? And we see that continuing and continuing. So we're in this discussion because fire trains them to automatically evacuate when that fire alarm is pulled. We train faculty and staff that if you are in lockdown, an intruder in your building, you remain locked down. And in fact, the question that you have to ask yourself is there a fire in my room right now that could injure or kill me? Or am I likely to die as a result of smoke inhalation? And if not, then what is the hurry for me to go outside of this building until we verify that it's not some other cause or not some other threat that in this case was a shooter? So what we recommend is, because of the codes and the way the school is built, if a teacher is in their classroom teaching, that fire alarm goes off, to immediately, one, ensure my door is closed and locked. Secondly, scan the area around me. Is there a direct fire? And if there is, should I evacuate, and where do we go? And we follow protocol then, but keep in mind it could be something to pull us out. And how do I reverse evacuate and all of those things? And then wait in a lockdown position while somebody from the school goes to evaluate the location of that alarm to determine whether or not there is a true threat from fire before we evacuate. But this has got to be one of those larger conversations that we have across the United States and get fire personnel involved, because right now the problem is International Fire Code will dictate more than security, because they have teeth behind that code that we don't have.
Yeah, that's a good point. So no one's in a school setting has died in a fire in 50 years. At that time, 50 years ago, fire with different building materials and things may have been the number one issue. And now we're striving for more of a balance to take into consideration the current threats that are facing us.
Absolutely. And even this school had actually focused on that, and there was a problem with the alarm. They were trying to change some things that they were going to do, and they had spent a large amount of money to do it. It had been funded, but the job had not been carried out yet. And I know that you and I had talked about that previously as well, but it goes to show you, well, we're looking at that, but are we looking at it from all sides? And that's why for us, we really try to look at all of these things from an all hazards approach. One hazard is going to affect another, but there's a lot of commonality in our responses between those various response to hazards. But the downside is, if you train people, let's say for a natural disaster, a tornado, typically that building is built with certain areas that are even stronger, that are our weather areas or our storm shelters, that a teacher might send a student to a bathroom to hide when they need someplace safe under that stress of an incident. But the problem is that bathroom is a safe location for a tornado, but not an intruder. So that's where sometimes we have to look at it. Yes, we want to train from an all hazards approach, but we also have to see how each one can be used to overlap, but also be detrimental to an appropriate response. Yeah,
it's just like our laws are being reformulated to look at technology and broadcasting and media, how all that's radically changed from, even 15, 20 years ago. The security environments that we're looking at now need to be rebalanced.
Absolutely.
We wanted to just acknowledge a comment from David Apel. Strategos training is top notch. We certainly appreciate that, and
thank you.
Honored by your comment there, and that's what we hope to do as part of this conversation as well, is to provide top notch information that's helpful to people. So, one area, Mark, that in terms of talking about balance is the issue of guns, gun restrictions, and gun rights. And we're not going to get into policy statements here, but right now, today, all of the energy in the media and in advocacy right now is about federal gun policy, whether restrictions or freedoms. And that's an important debate. But based on what we know, that's not a debate that's going to end soon. It's going to take a long time to see changes, and many of the laws that are already in effect, often data is not shared, laws are not enforced, and deaths occurred. So based on what we know about this particular situation and fresh information that it brings to mind, apart from federal gun policy, what are some non-controversial things that could be implemented immediately that would save lives in schools and other public settings?
I love the idea of that, because the frustration is every time one of these incidents happens, we do have these two extremes, and both sides claiming that if you just do what we're asking you to do, you'll never have one of these incidents again. But yet here we are. The reality is there's some very, very simple things that can be done. One, we've got to make people aware. People need to be aware of what's going on around them at all times. Be willing to report any suspicious behavior, anything that's concerning to you. Don't be afraid to report it, but you also need to report it now. You can't wait. There was always a frustration as a police officer when you would see somebody and they go, about 2 weeks ago, I saw a car parked behind this. Well, that was 2 weeks ago. I can't do anything about it now. So understand, we would rather have you call and it be nothing than to tell us 2 weeks after the fact and now someone's lost their life, that it could have been something that could have helped us solve this problem. So one, to everybody listening, don't be afraid to report to your local police. And if you don't get to your satisfaction, continue up that chain. Secondly, teachers, teach with your doors closed and locked. It's that easy. I know it can be inconvenient, but the reality is if you're already in lockdown, you're already ahead of the problem. Now, a good majority of these incidents, the shooter comes from within the school. He is a member. He is a participant in that school. So that's not saying it's going to make it where it can't happen. People have to understand preparation does not equal prevention. We can be prepared for a tornado and have all the things that we need to survive and go on. It doesn't mean the tornado is not going to hit us. So be prepared, and teaching with my door closed and locked doesn't mean that now I have 30 students in my classroom, something could still happen. I still need to know what my proper response to that needs to be. But compartmentalizing the school, limiting access to areas that other people don't need to be in or give even a great flow. As an example, this shooter went from the first floor, several classrooms, to the second floor where he engaged more people, and finally to the third floor where he engaged people. He had access to 3 different floors. What could we do to compartmentalize in that type of crisis? Shut off those stairwells where he doesn't gain access to more potential victims. So that would be something simple. And then to me, the most important thing, the most important security that you could ever spend money on is the people that work there and the students that attend there. What do they need to know? How are you going to teach them what they need to know, and then make that happen? As far as teachers, some of the things that they need to know, again, are awareness, behavioral patterning, some past instances of how these things happen and why we have to accept the realities of today, that it can happen to our schools. It can happen to our places of work. It can happen to our churches. So wherever we find ourselves as a nation, be prepared to understand it can happen. Once I accept that, now I can start looking at, now what do I do in response to that? Understand, we teach a 3-out principle: lock out, get out, take out, not in any particular order, based on where you are in relation to the threat and what your environment is around you. If I'm in a place like right now, my office, that I can easily lock down, my best response to something happening right now is possibly to lock and barricade that door. So understand those things, and then always have a plan for failure. What do I do if my lockdown is failing? Now I need to try and get out. Do I have that as an option? I'm in an office space that I have one way in, one way out. If my lockdown's failing, I have to go straight to that takeout option where I'm willing to fight. So there's a lot of simple things that can be done, but we don't always see it that way, because for so long we've always seen this as a law enforcement response problem. Call 911, the police are coming, wait until they get there.
Excellent thoughts. And it would be so heartening if everyone affected by this shooting, by this massacre or any others, rolled up their sleeves and went to work on solving these problems. They're not intractable problems. Locking a door, getting training. You didn't mention this, but it might include cameras, for example. And that doesn't mean that we set aside important policy debates that are happening at the federal or state level, but we know we can do something until that gets resolved.
You brought up a very, very important point, Roy, and that was even talking about hardware cameras. And the problem is that's typically where schools tend to go. When they do get funding, we'll spend millions to put a new turf field on the football field. But then when you talk about security stuff, they say, well, we don't have the money for that. So that's, again, part of that cultural change that's got to become an effect here in how we're going to respond to these things. But when you look at, let's say, camera is important, but now who's watching it? Who's watching that camera every second of every day, and what response capability do they have? So many times we put hardware in place, whether it's cameras, metal detectors. Go to a lot of the schools that have metal detectors, and who is manning the metal detectors? An unarmed security guard with a very low level of training and a very low capability of response. So while it makes us feel better, okay, I feel safer, I'm not really safer. See, I don't want people to feel safer. I want them to truly be safer. And that's a huge difference. So it's got to be an overall commitment and not just a simple solution. It's got to be a very broad, well thought through solution. And I think that that's one of the things that we've kind of shown ourselves to be good at is how can we understand the culture of the school and the mission, the core mission of the school and what they want to accomplish, and provide them a safer, secure environment to teach and learn in without overriding the core mission. We don't want to make it a prison, but what we do want to do is truly raise the capability of the people and the building itself to provide a safer, secure environment. And the frustrating thing is every time one of these things happens, the first thing somebody says is, we've got to make sure this never happens again. And where is our commitment to that? That's where I see that it's time for the rubber to meet the road. And what will that commitment be? And I saw one of the comments that came up, and I agree wholeheartedly. It is making the determination on what are we in our community willing to do to keep our kids safe. What are we willing to do? And then once we decide that, get it done.
I wanted to call out a comment from David Apel also again, and he was echoing similarly what you were said. Everything boils down to money and what you value the most.
Yeah, I love the statement. He followed that on, where a man's treasure is, there his heart is also. And that's true. The problem, I think, is there's that disconnect. And, parents often take for granted what a school is. And when we talk about cultural changes, I want to kind of speak to parents right now from the standpoint of, one, you have to understand school is not like when you went to school. It is a different culture. It is a different needs. The problems are different. And sometimes we as parents, when our children talk to us about what's happening in school, we go back to when we were in school. It's been 40 years since I was in school. So for me to look back and say, well, I know what it was like when I went to school and compare it to what somebody's doing today, if I didn't do what I did for a living, I might not fully understand that. So the problem is, as a parent, I take my child to school and I'm making a huge assumption that you have a safe working environment and learning environment for my child. And so it's a lack of knowledge many times that they don't know what's in place and maybe they've not asked those questions. So again, this is the dialogue that needs to be happening. Our parents need to be re-engaged in the school process and what's going on, and don't be afraid to ask questions of the leaders in your school to find out what their culture is and what their plan is for responding to these types of crises.
The comment that you made regarding commitment to make a difference, it just reminds me of a popular quote. Everyone wants a revolution, but nobody wants to do the dishes. It just kind of comes down to, are we willing to do the mundane things that maybe not aren't as glorious as waving banners and placards and things like that, but make a difference.
Absolutely.
Following up, Mark, on one of your statements about budgeting and priorities, when schools are built, we've talked a little bit about this before offline, there are numerous regulatory hurdles that must be met. For example, you can't open a school, for example, if you don't have enough parking spaces slated for people with disabilities. Obviously, that's very important. But you can open a school that is completely inadequately prepared to keep out bad guys. What needs to change? How does that change? Is it even possible?
And it has to change. It is like you said. I think that's probably in this particular incident, when I dug into this one again, that's when it hit me that I'm going through a permitting process to have some work done on our office here. And I had to go to the city and I have to apply for permits. We had to have structural engineer draw up plans. They had to have those plans approved. Now they're going to inspect the work. There is more being decided about the work being done on our building as it relates to safety. And safety and security are two different things. And so when you look at the permitting process, if a community is going to have a new school built, that process is get your plans drawn. They got to be approved by engineers. It's submitted to the governmental agency. They have to be signed off that it meets all of their requirements, and then the building starts. Electrician comes in, and his work has to be done to a code, International Building Code. A plumber comes in, his work has to be built to code, International Building Code. We have ADA compliance, just like you said, parking places, ramps, doors that are a certain width. We meet all of these requirements for ADA compliance, and then you have International Fire Code, where every piece of equipment and furniture that goes into that school is spec'd by fire code not to burn for a period of time. If there's carpeting on the floor, it is spec'd by International Fire Code. So my point is, we have all of these other entities that are telling the school, this is what you will do, this is how it will be done, but none of those things are ever looked at from a security standpoint. And safety and security, safety is basically natural disaster or things that we have the ability to protect people from, either by guards or building things a certain way. Security is a man-made disaster where people are looking to think around your protocols and what you put in place. And it has to be looked at from somebody that truly understands that. Schools are not built with any eye towards security. And when we wind up having to come in after the fact, do an assessment on the school and say, here's our short-term, mid-term, long-term assessment goals that you need to try and change, it costs, again, time and money. And it's much more expensive to do it on the back side than to do it on the front side when the building is being designed and built. And we never look at that, because one of the things that really would be so easy to do is compartmentalize the school. And when you compartmentalize, you're taking something large and making it smaller so that it limits access from one area to another. So it slows these people down and it keeps other victims from that same problem. And I hope that culturally, this is one of the things that maybe comes out of this latest incident. If something good is going to come out of it, hopefully it's this. We've got to get everybody to the table to discuss this stuff.
Well, a couple of things. One is I know that Strategos, part of the services that we offer are we will meet with architects, we will meet with the school administrators who are planning buildings to get this in on the ground floor. Another idea would be as schools are going before voters for bond issues, levy increases, that voters speak up and say, hey, how can we address security with this money? What are we going to do?
Right. I mean, I'll be honest, if we all just take a step back and look at your tax assessment bill, we're paying a large amount of money to our schools to educate our kids. And sometimes I think we're forgetting what's the core mission of the school. It is to educate our children to become productive members of our society. And sometimes I get it. My daughter played sports through her entire school career. And being able to do that allowed her to go on to college and play college sports, which really helped from a parental standpoint, not having to write those big checks. But the reality is, I would rather know that my daughter is secure and safe in that school than whether they had new AstroTurf on that ball field. I get the idea that we want the best for our kids, but sometimes our priorities may be flawed, and it's because of a lack of education. Parents are not engaging to really know what's the true needs. We need to define what is a want and what is a need. And as it relates to children's security in a school, right now, I think this latest shooting shows there is a huge need that's not being met in our schools.
Excellent thoughts. And this may be the next wave of parental activism are our schools secure? And we talked earlier this week on the importance of approaching administrators with expecting that they do have best intent, not to be adversarial in that role so that you actually get something accomplished. We want to also thank everyone who has either joined us or has watched all the way through. And we would love to hear any questions or note any comments that you have on this topic, looking for respectful comments, of course, towards one another and people involved. So please do let us know. And again, if you have valued what you've experienced here, please share that so others can benefit. And we have one last question just on our own, as well as anything that a viewer may share. And that was this, Mark, is that one of the things I first noticed when I saw this breakout when I was watching the news was that this shooter was still alive. And in fact, he'd been arrested. Why is that possibly unusual?
You know, it is unusual from the targeted school violence standpoint. A lot of these typical school shooters do commit suicide once they're confronted or pressured. It's not necessarily by police. It could be anyone that pressures them, that causes them to quit the act. A paper that was written by Lieutenant Daniel Modell with the New York Police Department called The Psychology of an Active Killer, we believe framed up the psychology of these people better than anything we've ever seen or read. And I've read the Secret Service study, the 2008 bystander study. I've read all of the different studies that have come out after these instances. But I think he hit it on the head. And one of the things that he really showed was that these people typically have a two-world view. They look at it, everyone in the world in two categories. You are either a victim or a victimizer. Now, how they perceive themselves is they've always seen themselves as the victim, and what they want to become is the victimizer. And so this in the course of being bullied or even the perceived bullying, the perceived victimization from everybody else now leads them into these types of situations. So when the police encounter them or the police show up, they don't want the police to kill them, because if the police kill them, they go out as a victim. But if they go out at their own hand, they go out as a victimizer. And we as a society are sitting back still wondering, why did they do this? And there's really no sense of justification, because when they take their own life, as opposed to the police killing them, or somebody else intervening and stopping them. Sometimes we have that lack of service was not done. But when you look at the psychology of these people, this student or this individual was not typical. I would say, just off the top of my head, let's say 65 to 70% of these people probably commit suicide in targeted school violence once they're pressured. So he didn't do that. And here's the other reason I think a lot of them do. Think about some of these suspects, and I hate to use their names, but if you go back to Newtown, 20-year-old, 6 foot, 112-pound male that went to a grade school, because if he'd gone to the last school that he had attended, he probably wouldn't have fared very well. Some 6'3", 250-pound football player, in his mind, could have overwhelmed him and stopped him from carrying out his act. So by going to a grade school, they are able to victimize those people acting like victims. But think about somebody like that being held and going to prison. Are they going to be able to withhold that psychology or that the way that they have portrayed themselves to be this hard, mean person for the rest of their lives in prison? They know that that's not a life for them. So again, they take themselves out. So with this kid, I really don't know what's going to happen with him. I got a feeling even when he's in right now, they had him in solitary confinement, keeping him segregated from everyone else. And then he was also on suicide watch, which is probably somewhat normal. But if he's convicted and goes to prison, I don't know how well he'll fare in prison.
And this is valuable information for people to understand the psychology of the active shooter. In that they can know the kind of person that they're dealing with, and just the extreme danger and recklessness that such a person is bringing to the situation. I do want to stop and acknowledge a comment from Joe Martinez. It sounds like you have a connection with Joe.
Hi, Joe. It's always good to hear from Joe. Yes.
And we do thank you. He said he was able to train with Mark early in his career, and the training is still valuable. So we thank you for that. We thank you for watching. Mark, any other comments on this topic today?
I do want to add just one follow-on comment, and you kind of hit on it. When we talk about the psychology of these people, that is why it's important. And we share this information with our customers and clients simply because that's why when it comes time, if you cannot lock out or get out, those are the two choices you have. But when it comes to the takeout, that person has made the decision for you. And that's why we say fighting back is so crucial, because when you fight back, you may force them back into that victim mindset that they've always been, which forces them into either stopping the act, leaving, or killing themselves. And to be honest, when it comes to that, I would rather them kill themselves than kill innocent people any day of the week. So it's important for people to understand when you have no other choice, fight back. And we do work with teachers, faculty, staff, corporate clients. And when we teach them how to fight back, it's not as difficult as people think. The improvised tools that are around you are plentiful, and it's just getting an idea and an understanding of how to employ them. And it's just important to do.
That's right. The tactical training, I don't want to say tactical, but the training that you're talking about, it isn't how to become a ninja, in 4 easy lessons. It's basically, what objects in the room can you throw at somebody to stun them, to make them, stop for a moment, while you can lock the door. Things that all of us need to know, but they don't occur to us naturally, especially when we are under extreme duress.
Right. So, I tell people all the time, the body can't go where the brain's never been. If you've not at least asked yourself, what would I do if, and let your brain go there, when it comes to that crucial second, if you've never thought about it, you've never thought it through, the likelihood of you responding or reacting to it's very low. And that's why for us, the hands-on training with any of our clients is so crucial, to let them go there in a practice, in a controlled setting, so that they can actually see what can be done. And I'm telling you right now, I don't want to be the bad guy. I get to be the bad guy all the time in our training scenarios. And when people do what they need to do, I don't want to be a real bad guy.
That's right. And I think what we're doing right now is extremely helpful in just simply we're talking about it. And it's an uncomfortable, unpleasant topic. But the more we talk, like you say, your body can't go where your brain has not been. I was just my wife and I were at a restaurant a few days ago, and we were talking about, I don't remember why this pleasant topic came up of what would you do if someone came in the door. I can promise you I didn't bring it up to, make the evening more romantic, but she brought it up. And I said, well, you start throwing stuff at him. And she said, really, I just can't even imagine doing that. I said, well, people want to hide under tables and things like that. And, that's why the outcomes happen the way they do. So talking, training, contemplating, as you said, not just drilling, but training employees and students. That's the only hope forward.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just one of those things that I think we're seeing that pendulum swing back. We're kind of coming back into the society now where people are starting to understand that they have to be their own first responder initially. And what will I do if? Growing up, I was a Cub Scout, a Weeblo, a Boy Scout. And what's the motto? Be prepared. That's never left me. But I think in a lot of ways in our society, we've gotten away from that. And we've said, I'll let somebody else be prepared for me. And it just doesn't work that well.
Excellent. I want to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of comments before we close off. John Moyer had a couple of comments, but his word, sheeple, you've probably heard that before. What does that mean to you, Mark?
I'll be honest, I try not to use it. Sheeple are the people that are kind of with their head in the sand. They don't believe it could ever happen here. They are looking for somebody else to take care of them. And I know why. I don't want someone to feel like I'm being condescending to anybody. Everyone comes from a different background, a different culture. My experiences are what make me who I am. And if I lived in a very rough area where I saw stuff every day, I had to fight frequently to get by, I'm probably going to have a different perspective than somebody that never had to. And I get that. So I don't want to insult somebody. And that's not that it's an insult. It's really a lack of knowledge when we refer to people as sheeple. Because honestly, if it goes all the way back to biblical times, what did the sheep represent? And it was the flock. It was the people. It was the sheep dog that keeps the wolves away from the sheep. And so there's a lot of reference to that today. And honestly, there are a lot of people that are sheep that they don't think it could happen. And it is through awareness. We want to raise their knowledge base so that they can accept risk. Once they can accept risk, they can start preparing for risk. And once you start preparing for risk, we can put mitigation things in place to help us overcome them.
Well, that's right. And to use the biblical analogy there, the idea is Jesus talked about sheep need shepherds. And so we need to provide leadership to whether it's students or people in a church congregation or an office. We need to step up and we need to own it for them so they can do their jobs. Another quote I wanted to highlight here, this is a little bit extensive, try to get it all, is from Chris Matlock. We appreciate Chris's comment. He said, ideas for securing all schools: all exterior doors should be steel, not glass that can be shot out, metal detectors with a distinct building-wide alarm, allow teachers to be armed, obviously those willing and able. So there's a lot there. Any comments?
Yeah, no, Matt has some really good points. One of the things that we typically make recommendations for anytime we do an assessment on the schools is, one, we don't want to change the culture. Obviously, we can make it into a prison. They still like that open feel and atmosphere. So that's why a lot of times they don't want the solid steel doors. But one of the things that we recommend is the impact resistant film. We have it on our glass here at our office. So what that simply means is in Sandy Hook, he would have been able to shoot the glass, but the glass would have withstood. It would not have given him the access that he would have needed. So at the minimum, we recommend the impact resistant glass that basically it could take someone 10 minutes with a baseball bat and they likely will still not beat their way through that glass. So that's one thing I definitely agree with Matt. And one of the other things that he said, as far as the fire alarms or distinct codes, for metal detectors. One of the problems with metal detectors that I see in schools is, honestly, they don't handle them correctly as far as the screening processes. In other words, and I've had to evaluate schools that they've got 750 kids getting off buses in a 15-minute time frame. They have to scan them into the building through metal detectors. And if the process is not correct, it's really it's a false sense of security again. It's easy to get things through and around. So that's one of those things that we can look at. I think it's another layer. It's another deterrent. Do we want to go to that level? I think it depends on the community. Every community has to decide what are they willing to do. But one of the last things that Matt had, if you could put that back up on number 3.
Absolutely.
Allowing teachers to be armed, those willing and able. But what really strikes me, I'm sorry, and I called you Matt, and it was Chris, so I apologize, Chris. One of the things that you really point out at the very end of that they need to be trained to shelter in place and protect them and their children. And I agree. If we're going to talk and have this discussion about arming teachers, it's not to go after the shooter. And here's why I say that. The level of training that they would need to be able to do that would be so extensive. I train police officers and have been training police officers full time since 2002. The level of training it would take to do that. And here's the other dilemma. If that teacher goes into the hallway after this person, who is still coming? The police. And now you have a plainclothes civilian, not necessarily known to the police, in the hallways going after somebody with a gun. Or if they shoot this person and he runs off and they chase him. So there's a lot more to the training elements of this that I definitely agree with Chris. I'm not saying do it or not, but I will say this. It should not be up to our state capitol or the federal capitol on whether a school could do that. Okay? I think that has to be pushed back to the community level. And the reason I say that is I've worked with school districts, let's say in northern Missouri, where the superintendent told me specifically, I'm going to get one police officer. It's going to take him 30 minutes and he can barely walk. And that's what they're going to have for an armed response. So for them, they were looking at the idea of maybe we do want to have some people trained in our school and armed, but state law prohibited it. So sometimes our blanket solution causes more problems for somebody else. And it's got to be a community-based decision on what they're willing to do, because the time, energy, money, all of those things needs to be pushed back to that community itself.
Great comments from people watching today. We appreciate it. And again, please share this if you find it valuable. And we appreciate your interaction and your comments today and your questions. A main takeaway for me, Mark, is so it's disheartening to look at another school shooting, another tragedy, a massacre like this. Don't want to downplay it in any ways. Nothing positive about that. But the positive thing is we've talked about a number of things that can be done immediately to make things better. And so what can we do as security professionals, as parents, as education professionals, to roll up our sleeves and go in and do maybe some of the mundane work that's not really maybe very exciting, but that is ultimately going to save lives. Something can be done.
Absolutely. There's programs out there where fathers volunteer, receive training, and they patrol the campuses. So there are a lot of different programs that are out there that would literally be there to assist people and put some simple solutions in place.
That's right. Let's be creative and not go back and try to look at the same problem the same way and just look at it harder. But what are some new approaches, or maybe approaches that we've forgotten about, or that things that haven't been tried that can make a difference right away? So,
absolutely.
Mark, thank you for your insights here today on this critical topic that is affecting so many millions of people here, not only in the United States, but around the world: parents, grandparents, students, teachers, administrators. I encourage you, if you are not acquainted with Strategos, Strategos can be a tremendous resource for you. They're not only highly intelligent, competent technically trained individuals, but they're simply great, easy people to work with. You can learn more about us at strategosintl.com on your screen. So let us know how we can be a resource to you, your church, your school, your business, and we will talk to you soon on another Strategos Security Week here on Facebook Live. Mark, thank you.
Thank you.